The pasta aisle at the grocery store has gotten completely out of control. So I bought a bunch of pasta and asked the question, is expensive pasta actually worth it? Specifically, I have over 15 or so different boxes of pasta ranging from $1 on the low end to over $9 on the high end. And to get to the bottom of this and see what is the difference between a $1, $3, $5, or $9 box of pasta really is, we're going to break this video down into 3 parts. First, how is dried pasta made? We're going to break down what pasta is made up of and the 4 variables every box of pasta has, which will explain how we end up with so many differences in price. Secondly, we'll cover what is the flavor of pasta. In this section, we'll break down the fundamental differences of taste, aroma, and texture between these varieties of pasta. For example, one of the most common claims is that the rough texture of bronze-cut pastas makes the sauce stick better. However, this is not really true. The pasta is not going to save you in this case. If you want your sauce to stick better, you need to make a better sticking sauce. Also, one of the things that I found out in this section is that I'm not really a fan of al dente pasta. I think it's kind of overrated. I like my pasta cooked for a minute or 2 longer. And then lastly, in section 3, based on what we've learned, we will be able to answer, is expensive pasta worth it? And specifically, you will have all the information you need to evaluate cheap versus expensive pasta boxes at the store and see if the benefits are worth it for you. So to start, let's find out how we end up with so many different price points of pasta. At a basic level, dried pasta made from semolina durum wheat is made up of 74% carbohydrates, 12.5% protein, 12% water, 1% fat, and then about 0.5% other vitamins and minerals. Then obviously, when we cook pasta in boiling water, it will absorb about 1.5 to 2 times its weight in water, depending on how long it cooks, which ultimately dictates the texture of the pasta. We're going to talk more about that shortly. However, when you're looking at all these boxes of pasta at the store, there's really just 4 variables that every home cook needs to understand. First, the wheat type. Secondly, the pasta shape. Third, the extrusion die type, such as Teflon versus Braun. And lastly, the drying process. And to understand where these variables come from, we need to know, how is dried pasta made? If you look at the ingredient label on a box of pasta, you'll typically see that it is made from semolina durum wheat, which actually refers to 2 different things. Durum wheat refers to the variety of the wheat kernel, of which there are 3 parts: the outer layer of bran, the germ, and then the endosperm, which is the starchy interior. Now, semolina refers to the flour made from the endosperm of the durum wheat kernel. This is made by grinding the endosperm to a coarser particle size of 0.2 to 0.4 millimeters, which is much coarser than something like all-purpose flour, which is closer to 0.05 or 0.15 millimeters. So why is semolina durum wheat prized for dried pasta? Well, first, it has a distinctive aroma. Second, it has a nice, appealing yellow color. And third, and most importantly, it has a high gluten protein content. And this is why other wheat types are typically not used in pasta making. The particles and protein network of the durum semolina make it perfect to withstand the high heat and pressure of pasta extrusion without fully gelating and breaking down. And what's important to know is that durum wheat is a very broad category. There are several species of durum wheat grown all around the world that can be used to make pasta. Huge pasta corporations might seek out the cheapest durum on the market from a variety of global producers, or higher-end producers like Montegrano, covered by Alex's series, source organic durum wheat from small Italian producers, and this makes for a much more expensive product. For example, a $1 spaghetti may have semolina durum wheat listed on the label, but they're not going to specify where it comes from. On the other hand, you may have some boxes made with durum wheat from North America, and it can get even more specific from there. I actually found 3 boxes of pasta that all came from durum wheat in Italy, but they specifically mention what specific wheat type that was grown in Italy, and we're going to do some testing with these boxes later. Anyways, once a company has sourced the wheat they are going to use for the dough, it goes through 4 basic steps, and this is where the other 3 variables come into play. First, the dough is mixed. The semolina flour is mixed with just enough water to hydrate the dough for extrusion. Typically, this is around 30 to 35% hydration, so for every 100 grams of semolina, there will be about 30 grams of water added. And the dough at this point will look like wet sand, but it will become more cohesive when pressed through the extrusion dies. Second, the dough is pressurized, extruded, and cut. The dough will be forced with huge amounts of pressure through the dies, which are basically tubes with small exit holes that extrude that pasta dough into a specific shape. We all know and love the shapes of spaghetti, rigatoni, penne, macaroni, or more unique shapes like zucca, Vesuvio, or cascatelli. And the die holes are either made of Teflon or bronze materials, which can result in a smoother or rougher texture, respectively. Teflon dies are more non-stick than bronze, so the pasta dough can pass through with less friction, resulting in a smoother pasta, and companies can also produce more in a given time with Teflon dies, thus reducing the price. Bronze dies, on the other hand, produce more friction, so the pasta dough extrudes with some rough edges and more slowly. Either way, as the pasta is extruded, the pressure, friction, and heat partially gelate the exterior of the pasta and shear the protein network into an alignment, producing the dense noodle structures we know and love, and then once they reach that desired length, they're typically cut. Once the pasta is extruded and cut, it now must be dried, which is more complicated than you might think. Producers must ensure the pasta dough sets and dries evenly without cracking, and also so it retains its strength and integrity during cooking. To accomplish this, the pasta is generally dried in phases to carefully control and reduce the moisture levels in the product until it is fully hardened without the brittleness. Modern machining can do this reliably in a matter of hours at higher heat cycles of around 185 degrees Fahrenheit. But other manufacturers stick to the old school slow drying methods, which happen at much lower temperatures around 100 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit and can happen over the course of a full day or multiple days. And as you can guess, the slower extrusion and drying process makes for a more expensive product. Slow drying components claim that more of the durum wheat flavor is preserved since that pasta is not exposed to higher heat. Now, the problem is slow drying or slow processing is not exactly a regulated term, so it's hard to know exactly what's going on there. Some boxes, on the other hand, will list very specifically what is going on. For example, this one tells me that slow drying was done at low temperatures, strictly below 38 degrees Celsius, for a minimum of 3 days up to 6 days. So it makes sense that this is just going to cost more than maybe one that was only dried for a day. Now, regardless of whether the pasta is slow dried or fast dried, this is how we go from that 30 to 35% hydration down to the 12% water that I mentioned at the beginning of this section. And after the pasta is dried, it is ready for the final step where it is packaged and sent to market and off down the supply chain. And obviously, depending on how far that pasta travels, the price can be impacted. And ultimately, these basic steps explain how we end up with all these various price points of pasta. There are the raw material costs, the equipment costs, production time, labor cost, import fees if it came from a different country, and ultimately the scale of the operation. Now, proponents of buying the more expensive pasta varieties generally boil down to three arguments. First, expensive pasta has a better taste and aroma. Secondly, expensive pasta has a better texture. And third, the sauce will stick better to more expensive bronze-cut pasta. But my question, as always, is how much of a difference are we really talking about? Remember, pasta is typically slathered in sauces and lots of other aromatic ingredients, so it may be easy to tell the difference between like a $1 and a $5 box, but what about a $3 box and an $8 box or a $9 box? Well, we are going to get into the bottom of this and break down the flavor of pasta. At a high level, these 6 properties can explain the flavor of food: taste, aroma, texture, sight, physical, and the human element. And during this section, we're really going to focus on taste, aroma, and texture as they are the most relevant when it comes to pasta. So let's start with taste. Our tongue registers 5 core tastes: sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and umami. And from a taste perspective, pasta is pretty neutral tasting, and you can test this quite easily. Here I have 3 bowls of spaghetti, a $3 one, a $6, and an $8, all definitely made with different wheats. As I can visually see, there are some differences here. So what I'm gonna do is plug my nose and give each of them a taste. Number 2. So texturally, there are some differences. We're going to talk about that shortly. But from a pure taste perspective, when I'm plugging my nose, there is no significant difference. Now, the question you may be wondering is, does that change when you go all the way to the low end with a $1 spaghetti? So let's try it.
So this Teflon die-cut pasta does have a significant difference in taste, and it is my favorite, but not for the reason you think. This is the only pasta that I actually added salt to. The rest of these other three I left completely unsalted. And this is really why salting your pasta water is one of the most fundamental things you should do every time you cook with pasta.
As we learned in the salt deep dive, sodium chloride is water soluble and it will diffuse from areas of high concentration to low concentration. So as the water hydrates the dried pasta, that dissolved sodium chloride diffuses inside with it. But the question is, from a pure taste perspective, is there a significant difference in the taste of these various pastas? And the answer is not significantly. From a chemical level, pasta does not really trigger anything in our taste receptors, and this is why we add strong tasting ingredients to our pasta dishes. We add salt to our pasta water. Parmigiano Reggiano is a very common salty garnish, the sourness from a tomato sauce, or the lemon in linguine alla vongole. The 5 tastes are not that important when it comes to pasta, but this is very different from the tomato deep dive, where I learned that certain cans of tomatoes can be much more sour than others. For example, if I could only spend money on one for a tomato-based pasta dish, I'd probably recommend spending your money first on the tomatoes, then see what you have left over for your pasta.
Again, we are talking about pure taste here, which is why I'm plugging my nose throughout this section, and I highly recommend you just do this quickly at home. Eat some pasta, plug your nose, because it's very important to distinguish between taste and aroma, because most of that flavor we think of in our brain is actually from when you can open up your nose and smell the unique aromas that this pasta was created with.
While there are 5 core tastes or tongue registers, there are hundreds of aroma molecules that our nose receptors can pick up on. And the smell of food is really what provides most of the complexity in the foods we eat. And if someone is claiming that expensive pasta or a specific brand has a better flavor, what they really mean is they believe it smells better. So in order to get to the bottom of this, we need to ask the question, can you actually smell a difference between pastas?
So this might be a little weird, but in front of me I have various bowls of pasta powder made from ingredients other than the standard semolina durum wheat. I just threw some different pasta varieties into a spice grinder. I have some yellow lentil pasta, some corn and rice pasta, whole wheat spaghetti, and then I have some durum wheat here on the end. And if I take a little spoonful of each of these, it should be no surprise that they have a significantly different aroma. That corn and rice one has a very strong aroma. So fundamentally, these pastas are made with different ingredients other than that durum wheat semolina. It would be like comparing a potato chip versus a tortilla chip or corn tortilla versus a flour tortilla. However, where it gets tough is when you start evaluating all durum wheat pasta, because we have lots of biases built up and we know what pasta should taste like, so it's easy to pick out a difference between, whole wheat pasta or some of these other varieties. Not that they're bad in any way, but they're just fundamentally different. And really the question that we need to ask when it comes to all these different price points of pasta is how much of a difference in the aroma is there versus these various varieties of durum wheat. So unlike coffee, where most bags these days will tell you exactly what variety and where those coffee beans came from, we typically don't get that granular when it comes to our pasta boxes. But at the store, I was able to find 3 different boxes where they do specify exactly the wheat type that was used to make these pastas. So we're gonna cook them up and give them a little smell test.
Remember from earlier, there are different species of durum wheat that pasta producers can source for their pasta, and the slow drying process is said to preserve more of the original wheat flavor. So how different is the speedy high heat Teflon compared to the bronze cut? Or what about the bronze cut, which I assume are all processed the same, but just made with different wheat varieties?
So what I did was essentially create pasta grits, because this is like a thinner spaghetti, this is linguine shape, and then this is normal spaghetti. So I didn't want to be influenced by the texture just yet. But let's blindfold up and see if there are kind of any differences here. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Obviously a very strong pasta aroma because I've broken everything up. So yeah, really good. Subtle difference, but number one is definitely a little bit more pronounced to me. Number two, a little bit milder, I'd say. So number three. All right, very interesting. Drastic differences in aroma? Definitely not. Can you pick out some differences? For sure. I think number one is probably my favorite. Let's see what it is. Okay, so this one on the far end is the Il Capelli wheat. So can you smell a difference in the aroma between these pastas? I would say subtly, yes. However, I don't think it's anywhere near the difference that you'd see in like a whole wheat pasta versus durum wheat or one of those other varieties I tried earlier. And I'm questioning if you would notice this in a side-by-side pasta dish because you got to keep in mind, we add very strong smelling aromatic ingredients to most of our pasta dishes. For example, aglio e olio has a ton of garlic and parsley. Cacio e pepe uses a bunch of black pepper and pecorino romano. Carbonara has guanciale and parmigiano. And marinara sauce has spices like oregano, basil, and aromatic ingredients like garlic and onion. So while I can pick up on some subtle differences here in the aroma, I just think overall it's not a very important flavor category, especially when you consider all of those other strong aromatic ingredients we tend to add to our pasta dishes. The one caveat would be if you are using something like a whole wheat pasta or one of those other, like that corn and rice one was very strong smelling earlier. But again, it's just a fundamentally different ingredient. And I think, honestly, whole wheat pasta is kind of slept on. It is a different aroma, a unique nutty taste, which depending on what you're adding to your pasta can be a really nice mix-up from time to time. Overall, I think it is important for you guys to understand what pasta actually smells like so you can pick up on it when you're cooking with pasta. But ultimately, I'm just going to leave aroma here because I want to move on to the last flavor property and the one that I think is the most important when it comes to choosing pasta at the store, and that is the texture.
Distinct textures are what we often love about different foods, and when it comes to pasta, there are three texture elements that every home cook needs to understand when buying and cooking with dried pasta. First is the shape of the pasta, second is the texture of the cooked pasta, third is the texture of the sauce that coats the pasta. And if we marry these three together, this is where that uniquely satisfying experience of chewing a piece of pasta coated in a good tasting and aromatic sauce comes from. And the shape of the pasta is the first and most important decision of the three, and to prove this, I made two classic pasta dishes with two very uncommon pasta shape choices.
So here I have some macaroni and meatballs and spaghetti and cheese, and you have no idea how wrong this feels, and it's purely because of the shape of the pasta. So obviously the taste and aroma of these dishes are fine, but I, and probably you too, have years and years of human biases built up that if I'm having macaroni, it probably is going with a cheese sauce like this, and if I'm having meatballs, it's probably going with a spaghetti. Even though cacio e pepe does exist, which I guess would be the same family, this macaroni and cheese sauce on spaghetti just feels so wrong. And obviously, this is a bit of a silly example, but it really does prove the point that the pasta shape you choose does matter. And one of the benefits of buying bronze cut pasta is that you can make pasta shapes that are not possible on Teflon dies.
If you followed along the Sporkful Pasta series with Dan Pashman a couple of years ago, one of the main challenges they had was shaping the pasta during production. Cascatelli, the pasta they were trying to create, has a mix of ridges and ruffles, and even though they were using bronze dies and that slower extrusion process, they still had tons of issues. There was breakage during production, there was uneven thicknesses, clogging of the dies, and fragility after drying where it would crack during packaging. And this shape would have been impossible to make on a Teflon die. However, if you go to a grocery store with a large selection of bronze cut slow processed pastas, you'll likely find more variety in the pasta shapes. And here's some of the unique shapes that I was able to find at the grocery store. Let me know down in the comments how many of these you've cooked with before. There's bucatini, Vesuvio, Trophy, Canoliki, Zucca, Cavatelli, Orchiette, and Cascatelli. And ultimately, this is all preference-based. No one is stopping you from making macaroni and meatballs, and we could do a whole separate video on pasta-shaped pairings. But if you're looking for a little inspiration, we did a quick write-up that will be linked in the description below, explaining what shapes may pair well with certain kinds of sauces. And I think one of the joys in making pasta dishes is just going out and trying new shapes from time to time.
This might be the first time in history anyone's used bronze cut spaghetti with a store-bought mac and cheese sauce. Wouldn't recommend recreating this one at home.
Okay, so pasta shape matters, but what if you do have the same pasta shape, but one is bronze cut and the other is Teflon cut? How different is the texture in the bite? And this ultimately depends on how long you cook your pasta. Just because you buy some expensive pasta, you can still over or undercook it. So let's kill two birds with one stone with this next texture test. For this next test, I set up two pots with exactly 400 grams of water, 100 grams of pasta, then just pulled a piece off for every minute up to about 15 minutes. And this is where we can see the pasta beginning to swell up and absorb the water, changing its texture. So let's see how different these really are.
So this was definitely a very interesting test, and I think I'm pretty surprised how close these ended up being. And then additionally, I think one thing that you'll find when you are choosing the same shape is that on average, Teflon seems to be just a little bit on the thinner side compared to most bronze die-cut pastas. So what I try to do is find two different pasta varieties as close as possible, but even then, these on average are a little bit bigger, just by a little bit, and that kind of showcases up here. Now, secondly, I think just as important as asking yourself, like, should I buy Teflon versus bronze, is what level of firmness do you actually like? So all the way at this 14-minute mark, which is a little bit past what both of these boxes says, I still really like that bronze cut pasta. The Teflon, I think, is a little bit just barely too soft for me. But let's come down here to 9 minutes. Okay, so after doing little bites along the way, I think it is pretty interesting just how that slight difference in the thicknesses does kind of permeate throughout the entire, spectrum here. And then for me, I think another realization I'm having is I don't really like what I think most people think of as al dente pasta, where it is a little bit on that firm side. I think instead of cooking my pasta for a minute or two less than the box says, personally, I like my pasta cooked maybe a minute or two more than the box says. I don't want it mushy, but it has a really satisfying chew, especially in this upper range, which I think I am definitely a fan of.
So does bronze cut pasta inherently have a better texture? Well, it's definitely different. Like if you eat these side by side, the texture as you bite through is different, but it is down to preference. Like just because I like bronze die cut pasta because it is a little bit thicker and I can make it a little bit chewier and it holds up, doesn't mean that you like that. So I would definitely recommend doing this test side by side because the texture of the cooked pasta you make is one of the most significant differences you will notice. With that being said though, let's move on to texture element number 3, and that is the sauce. Like I mentioned in the intro, one of the most common claims of buying bronze cut pasta is that the rough edges help that sauce stick better. But the difference is negligible at best. If you want to make your sauce stick better, you need to make a properly emulsified sauce. However, there is another claim that I've actually made in the past, and that is bronze cut pasta typically releases more starch than Teflon cut pasta, which is one of those classic emulsifying ingredients in several of the Roman pasta dishes. However, I'd like to slightly alter that claim because you can still get plenty of starchy pasta water in two different ways. First, you can evaporate more of the water and concentrate the starch solution, or second, you can just add a separate cornstarch gel.
Okay, so this is some leftover pasta water that I let just cool down in the fridge, and as you can see, it is completely gelatinized. And this is from a Teflon die cut pasta, showing that, yeah, there is still plenty of starch that you could use to make that creamy emulsified sauce. I did need to concentrate it down a little bit more compared to the bronze die cut pasta, or like I've shown in the cacio e pepe video, you can just make your own cornstarch gel separately to help you get a really nice emulsified sauce. Functionally, there's no difference. All of this is just gelatinized starch. So to round this video out, let's finally answer, is expensive pasta worth it?
So the first question I'm going to ask is, can you make really good pasta dishes with even the cheapest pasta? And to that, I would say absolutely. I personally would argue that you get about 80% of the benefits just from understanding the fundamentals and techniques around pasta. And here's a checklist that I would go through that is going to immediately put you ahead of most people. First, choose the right pasta shape. Second, use a small amount of water to increase the starch concentration. Third, salt the pasta water liberally. Fourth, cook the pasta to your desired texture, whether a minute or two longer or shorter than the box says. And lastly, make a great tasting, aromatic, and appropriately textured sauce. Now, if you already understand those fundamentals and use those techniques when you're cooking pasta, the next question is, can some of these bronze cut and more expensive pasta varieties take your really good pasta dishes to great pasta dishes? And to that, I would also say yes. By far, the number one benefit for me is the texture. I definitely prefer the bite that I get from a thicker bronze cut pasta cooked for a couple minutes longer than the box says. Additionally, I really like that you can get access to more unique shapes, which is just a fun mix-up from time to time. And after making this video, I have a lot of pasta shapes that I can now have fun with for the next year. Secondly, I would call the difference in aroma a minor benefit. You can definitely smell a difference in pastas made with different wheats. However, your mileage is going to vary depending on the dish you are making. Personally, I think pasta alla cecca, which is one of my favorite pastas to make during the summer, would be a good use case for one of these more expensive spaghetti varieties made with a specific wheat, because it's an uncooked sauce, so the flavor of the pasta is an important part of the overall dish. However, if you're making like a big spaghetti night for a bunch of people and you want to save some money, I would maybe just go with the cheaper variety and probably spend your money on the tomatoes instead. Also, I will say, do not sleep on whole wheat spaghetti. It is a nice difference and kind of earthiness that really pairs well with a lot of dishes. I made this quick little Italian sausage, broccoli, and Parmesan cheese dish. And yeah, this is just a nice aromatic difference to use from time to time that you can't replicate with semolina durum wheat. So based on what we've learned and what I've personally tested, that's kind of where I fall on the discussion of cheap versus expensive pasta. But here's where I would love to hear from you. Do you typically buy bronze cut pasta? What's your favorite pasta shape? And what's your go-to pasta dish? Because I think it is a very interesting discussion, and it kind of depends on the use case, whether it may be worth it or maybe not. Also depends on your budget, how many people you are serving, but that is ultimately the human element of discussion. So as always, thank you guys for watching. We will have that kind of pasta shape guide linked down below in the description, as well as a bunch of pasta recipes if you just want to try. I am now going to make a bunch of pasta, which is good. I actually feel like I have not been making a lot of pasta the past like 6 to 9 months or so, but now this video has really gotten me in the mood to start making a lot more pasta. So, I mean, I guess it's a good thing that I bought a bunch of pasta. Anyway, I digress. That's going to wrap it up for me in this one. Thank you all for watching. I will catch you all in the next one. Peace, y'all.